Some big decisions ahead for Justin Trudeau, but maybe big trouble. Look, costs are ballooning for the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. The government announced on Friday it will cost over $5 billion more than it had first estimated. That's about $13 billion now. Can the government bear the cost? How will they find a buyer for it? And then another frontier. Does the government now need to greenlight a controversial new oil sands project, an open-air mine, roughly twice the size of the city of Vancouver? If it ever gets built, it would produce 260,000 barrels of oil a day. But how would the Liberal government ever hope to reach their goal of net zero emissions by 2050 or hit their Paris targets? Difficult decisions. So I can't sort it out. That's why the Scrum's here. Tanya McCharles usually has the answer. So does Bob Fife. Our special guest this round, the chair of the Indigenous governance at Ryerson University, Pam Palmater, and Alberta Conservative MP John Barlow. Great to have everyone here. Let's start with TMX. And boy, there's lots of news here, Pam Palmater. Federal Court of Appeal said First Nations Aboriginal groups do not have a veto. They were properly consulted. Is the fight against TMX over?
It's clearly not over. You had the First Nations involved in this particular case already give a press conference saying they're applying for leave to appeal to Supreme Court of Canada, as well as other actions. And other First Nations and other environmental groups are now also contemplating other and additional actions. You've seen the nationwide protests across the country, so this isn't just about what's happening here in TMX. And we know that there's already been conflict on the ground in terms of Wet'suwet'en territory, one of Trans Mountain subsidiaries. There will be in Secwépemc territory. This is by no means over.
No, and I think that it's clear. I mean, First Nations play a long game on all of this. They will. I anticipate that that decision will be appealed. And look, there's a solidarity building, and we've seen this in waves in Canadian history before. But there's a solidarity building, as Pam said, among other First Nations in the country, because that decision actually was basically said they don't get a veto on these projects. And so then what does free, prior, and informed consent mean anyway? And the government is now focused very much on that effort. They promised legislation to move projects like this forward, but to accommodate the Indigenous concerns. But we've already seen blockades in the biggest passenger corridor in the country going into the weekend. So I see this continuing and being a huge headache.
But Bob, the court was pretty clear. They said consultation does not mean a veto. Otherwise, you can consult any project to death.
Look, the Supreme Court has said the same thing, that we have to properly consult First Nations, but they do not have a veto. And we have seen in the TMX that it was the result of consultations that brought about the changes not only along the waterfront, but also along the route. So consultations do make a big difference. The next step, though, I think if we're going to seriously involve First Nations in these kind of projects, is they need to have an ownership stake in TMX. I think that if they can see some of the economic benefits from getting our resources to market, that I think takes away a lot of the edge against an opposition.
John Barr, let me just bring you in. I mean, now the price of the TMX is ballooning from, it was originally $4.5 billion, now we're closer to $13 billion. Is that, in your mind, A, do we get our money back, but is that an indictment of this whole process to get these projects approved?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look back. This was a private sector project, so this shouldn't be taxpayers' dollars being built to build TMX in the first place. This would have been Kinder Morgan using private sector dollars. The taxpayer would not be on the hook for this. Let's be honest, it would have been very difficult to find a private sector buyer for TMX once the Trudeau government stepped in and bailed them out. And now the costs ballooning. We said this from the beginning when the Trudeau government admitted or said they were going to buy this pipeline, that the costs were going to be well beyond the $4.5 billion.
So they said $4.5 originally to buy it, then another $7 to build it, but now it's up to what?
$12.6 billion.
$12.6 billion.
I think that cost was always lowballed. So I think that a lot of people who followed that file expected that cost to balloon. The legal fight has added tremendously to the costs. But I disagree that there won't be any private sector buyer for this. And I think Bob's right that already Jason Kenney and Justin Trudeau have committed, Bill Morneau, the finance minister, have committed to helping Indigenous communities buy an equity stake in it. So one way or another, once that thing gets going, I think there will be buyers.
But Pam Palmater, Jason Kenney keeps making the case. He goes, there's 129 First Nations along that route. Most of them support this thing. So shouldn't you listen to the majority on these things?
It's completely irrelevant. In law, that's irrelevant. Each First Nation has their own Aboriginal rights under the Constitution, and it doesn't matter if there's 1,000 First Nations in a different area, in a different context that say, okay, if one says no, they have the right to say no.
Okay, but the question is that a veto? All right, let me just quickly go to the tech frontier mine, and I'll start with you. You're from Alberta. You know, the government, they got this rocket hard. If they approve it, environmentalists will go crazy. If they reject it, Alberta is going to go crazy. What's the answer here?
Well, I think the answer is approve it. The joint assessment said that this meets all the criteria. It's environmentally safe. We have 14 First Nations signed on, and we were talking about having First Nations ownership. Well, that's going to happen with this tech mine. So this ticks all of the boxes. Now, let's be very clear. The joint assessment was done in July. They gave it the green light and met all the criteria. Now it's a political decision.
But it did say, to be fair, it said there was going to be massive environmental consequences. The Joint Review Panel did not sugarcoat that.
But it also said that those not building this could have more environmental impact because those resources would be displaced by other countries that don't develop their resources to the same environmental standards as Canada.
You know, we're all talking to people in the PMO and the Liberal Party, Liberal caucuses. Drumbeats are against this. The Prime Minister's office, if you talk to the senior officials, they're pouring cold water on it. They're saying this project may never get built. It's $20 billion. It's going to add more megatons to the emissions, and that it's just not it's not something that the government is comfortable with doing. So I think they're going to do is put a lot of conditions on this, and the question will be, how does Alberta and Saskatchewan react, and how does the foreign international investors react to a decision like this?
So I think that what's interesting to figure out where that ball's going, and one of the boxes that the project doesn't tick yet is the economic viability of it. The company itself is already hinting that this is a problem, even without all the conditions we might expect. So even if the government at this point says we're going to hold off, the company itself has signaled a little bit of an off-ramp for the government. They're saying maybe 7, 8 years, right? So how does Alberta, and how do the people who propose that project and say Justin Trudeau has to do it our way or the highway, how do they get around that if the company itself is questioning the value of it at this point?
Well, that's not Justin Trudeau's decision to make. We have the pathway to approve it under the environmental assessment. That is done. It's up to Teck to decide whether it wants to build it or not. That should not be a decision of the Liberal government and the cabinet to make the decision. Does Teck have the financial wherewithal to build this or not?
I'm guessing that they might factor that into their political decision.
Well, I know. Is it an environmental decision or a political one? Pam Palmater, what's your view on how the Liberal government's got to calibrate approval or rejection of this project?
Well, look, their tactic for Trans Mountain was to buy it to defeat First Nation interests at all. So what are they going to do? Buy Tech Mine? They really need to look at their overall national economic strategy. They're racing, literally diving to the bottom of an industry whose bottom is falling out. There's economists who are saying the oil industry and all of the associated industries could collapse in as early as 10 years, yet they're making economic predictions around 20 and 30 years. Not even to include the fact that we've got this impending tidal wave of climate change happening, and you can't ignore that. So on an economic front, First Nation front, and climate change front, none of these projects make any sense when you have other countries worldwide doing 100% renewable. Why aren't we investing in tech and renewable?
I'll give you just a quick last word on that, John.
Yeah, I think as much as I respect Pam, I think she's being disingenuous. Every study that we've seen is the demand for fossil fuels is going to increase for the next 50 to 100 years. Other countries are not going to 100% renewables. And Teck Energy has already announced that they will be net zero emissions by 2050, matching what Prime Minister Trudeau is saying. So we have done everything we can in Alberta to try and make this work. And I think it's up to Justin Trudeau to ensure that if unity is really his goal, that he stands up for Alberta in this case.
Well, this could be one of those tech frontier, final frontier moments for Justin Trudeau on natural resources, and we'll find out what he does. They've got till the end of February to approve that. I got to leave it there. John Barlow, Pam Palmater, Tonda McCharles, Bob Fife. Always great to see all of you here. Thank all of you for spending part of your Sunday with us on well, you can see a pretty snowy day. Politics will warm it up next week. We're back here in 7 short days. Thanks for watching.